Clay Davis never shoots anyone, runs a drug corner, or orders a body hidden inside a vacant house. In a city filled with murderers, corrupt police officers, dishonest lawyers, and politicians who treat public money like campaign fuel, calling him the most crooked person in Baltimore may sound exaggerated. It depends on what crooked means. Marlowe and Avon are more violent. Maurice Levy causes greater damage to criminal cases. Burrell and Rawls manipulate police work to protect their careers. Scott Templeton invents stories, while McNulty invents an entire serial killer. Clay still separates himself from all of them because corruption is not something he turns to when he becomes desperate. It is the foundation of his career. He takes money from drug dealers, developers, campaign donors, charities, and anyone else willing to hand it over. He sells access he may not possess, promises results he cannot guarantee, and protects himself by making every transaction look close enough to legitimate politics. When investigators finally place him on trial, he turns the prosecution into another political opportunity. Clay does more than survive Baltimore's corrupt system. He understands it well enough to charge everyone else admission. The first important sign of his power appears when the investigation into the Barksdale organization begins following its money. Detectives expect the financial trail to remain inside the drug trade. Instead, it begins reaching legitimate businesses, property transactions, campaign contributions, and political figures. That discovery changes the attitude of the police leadership. Investigating street dealers is encouraged because those arrests produce statistics and photographs. Following drug money into politics creates different consequences. Senior officials begin asking where the investigation is going, which names are appearing, and whether the detectives understand the trouble they are creating. Clay benefits before he even speaks to anyone in the detail. His position creates hesitation around him. The police know how to arrest a teenager holding drugs on a corner. A state senator connected to suspicious money requires meetings. That difference gives Clay room to operate. Drug money can become campaign money, development money, or a contribution to a political organization. Once the cash enters that world, its meaning becomes easier to debate. Every person involved can claim they thought someone else had checked where it came from. Clay later explains his attitude very clearly while defending himself to Mayor Royce. He says he will take anyone's money if they are giving it away. He has no interest in asking where it came from. The statement sounds careless, although Clay understands exactly why ignorance helps him. If he asks questions, he may receive answers that create responsibility. If he accepts the money without asking, he can later present himself as a busy politician raising funds from hundreds of supporters. Clay's ignorance is carefully maintained. He wants enough knowledge to recognize an opportunity and very little knowledge once the money reaches his hand. That approach becomes especially effective when Stringer Bell attempts to enter legitimate business. Stringer has spent years trying to remove unnecessary violence from the drug trade. He creates the co-op, studies economics, attends business classes, and begins investing Barksdale money in property development. He believes the legal world will reward planning and intelligence more than the street does. The problem is that Stringer understands the drug trade better than he understands politics. On the street, payments usually come with clear expectations. Territory, product, protection, and debt all have understood meanings. The people involved may be criminals, but they know what they are purchasing. Stringer assumes political corruption works in a similar way. He gives Clay money and expects permits, access, government support, and movement on his development projects. Clay recognizes immediately that Stringer does not understand the process. He presents every delay as another problem requiring another payment. Someone at City Hall needs to be influenced. Another office needs to approve something. A consultant needs to be paid. A contribution may help move the process forward. Each explanation sounds believable because city development genuinely is complicated. Stringer cannot easily identify where the real bureaucracy ends and Clay's invention begins. That uncertainty allows Clay to keep charging him. By the time Stringer speaks with Levy, he has given Clay approximately $250,000. Levy explains that Clay has rain-made him. A rainmaker takes credit when something works and requests more money when it does not. If the permit arrives, Clay claims his influence made it happen. If the permit remains delayed, Clay says another person needs to be paid. Either result proves that Clay deserves money. The scene is humiliating for Stringer because Levy already knows Clay's reputation. Stringer believed he was entering a more advanced world where educated people made rational deals. He discovers that the state senator has been running a version of the same corner scam with better clothes and less risk. Stringer becomes so angry that he wants Clay killed. Avon has to explain the obvious problem with murdering a state senator. Avon understands that street power has geographical limits. Clay operates in a world where an attack would bring city, state, and federal attention at the same time. That conversation reveals why Clay can steal from someone as dangerous as Stringer. He knows Stringer cannot respond through the usual street methods without creating a disaster for himself. Clay is protected by the same public office he is abusing. Stealing from an ordinary taxpayer is easy. Taking $250,000 from a drug organization and leaving the drug organization unable to complain requires a little more confidence. The scam also tests the idea that Clay is simply participating in normal political corruption. Stringer believes he is paying for influence, which would already be illegal. Clay goes further by taking money for influence he may never intend to use. A conventional corrupt official completes the favor after receiving the bribe because future payments depend on being reliable. Clay realizes that unreliable service can be more profitable when the victim does not understand the system. He can keep inventing costs until the person runs out of money, or finally speaks to someone who recognizes the trick. His value, therefore, comes partly from his reputation and partly from confusion. Clay knows which offices, permits, grants, and political relationships sound plausible. The victim knows just enough to believe him and too little to check every claim. This makes Clay different from the street criminals who use direct force. Avon can threaten someone, but that person understands they are being threatened. Marlowe can take a corner, but everyone knows what he wants. Clay leaves his victims uncertain whether they were robbed or simply received a disappointing result from government. That uncertainty is one of his strongest protections. Clay also understands that public corruption needs a respectable explanation. Money entering his operation can be called a donation, campaign support, constituent assistance, or community funding. The same amount can look suspicious to an investigator and completely ordinary to someone familiar with the informal way local politics works. He uses that ambiguity during his trial. Lester and the other investigators help trace financial transactions connected to Clay, while prosecutor Rupert Bond decides to pursue the case. The evidence shows money moving through Clay's political operation in ways that appear personal and dishonest. Checks are cashed, records are weak, and large amounts cannot be cleanly connected to their stated purpose. Bond sees a major corruption conviction. He also sees what convicting a state senator could do for his own career. That second motive becomes important because Clay knows how to recognize ambition in other people. Bond wants to present himself as the prosecutor willing to clean up Baltimore politics. He keeps the case at the state level and treats the trial as a public opportunity, even though another piece of evidence could support a stronger federal charge. Clay responds by making the trial political. He does not defeat the financial evidence through a detailed accounting of every dollar. He gives the jury a story about how politics works in poor neighborhoods. Constituents approach him with emergencies. Someone needs help paying a bill. A family cannot afford a funeral. A person needs rent, food, transportation, or assistance navigating a government office. Clay presents himself as the politician who gives people cash when formal systems move too slowly. According to his version, the missing records are evidence that he helped people directly rather than forcing them through paperwork. The explanation is effective because parts of it are probably true. Clay likely has helped constituents. Politicians build loyalty by solving small problems, attending community events, and making themselves available to people who feel ignored by government. Clay has remained successful because he understands those relationships. His corruption hides inside real public service. That makes the prosecution's task much harder. Bond wants the jury to see unexplained withdrawals and dishonest bookkeeping. Clay asks them to remember every time an official system failed someone they knew. He presents the lack of paperwork as proof that he cared more about people than procedure. Clay also frames Bond as an ambitious prosecutor attacking a respected black politician to advance his own career. Once that argument reaches the jury, the trial is no longer limited to whether Clay misused money. It becomes a question of who understands the community and who is exploiting it. Bond helped create that opening by treating the case as part of his political future. Clay simply uses Bond's ambition more effectively than Bond uses his corruption. The jury acquits him. Clay walks outside the courthouse as a political survivor surrounded by supporters and cameras. Bond's case has collapsed, while Clay looks like a man who defeated an unfair prosecution. Evidence that should have ended his career leaves him with a stronger public story. This acquittal is the strongest argument for calling Clay the most crooked character in the show. Many characters avoid consequences because evidence is missing, witnesses disappear, or institutions decide a case is inconvenient. Clay stands in court, listens to the evidence against him, and convinces a jury that the suspicious money proves he is generous. He turns the act of being investigated into material for his defense. Scott Templeton also survives through storytelling, but his lies work because his editors want to believe them. Clay tells his story directly in the place created to test it. He understands the jury, the prosecutor, the city's racial politics, and the gap between formal accounting and neighborhood politics. Every weakness in the system becomes part of his performance. His famous way of stretching the word shit is entertaining, though it also hides how intelligent he is. Clay often behaves like an exaggerated political hustler because people underestimate someone who appears shameless. Stringer does. Bond does. Even Lester briefly assumes the evidence will frighten him in a straightforward way. Clay's intelligence becomes clearer after the trial. Lester still has evidence connected to possible mortgage fraud, sometimes described as a headshot because it could produce a cleaner federal case. Federal authorities are unwilling to pursue it after Clay's acquittal has turned him into a politically sensitive figure. Lester does not tell Clay that. He approaches him and allows Clay Davis was the most crooked person in The Wire. The Wire contains drug dealers, murderers, dishonest police officers, corrupt lawyers, lying journalists, and politicians who can discuss a public crisis for 20 minutes without mentioning the public. Calling Clay Davis the most crooked person in that group requires some explanation. Clay does not control the largest drug organization or order the most murders. His corruption works differently. He uses a position created to serve Baltimore as a way to collect money from nearly everyone trying to influence it. Drug dealers pay him. Developers use him. Political campaigns protect him. Poor residents become part of his defense whenever somebody asks where the money went. Other characters break the rules of their institutions. Clay has built an entire career around making the rules useful to him. The first sign of his reach appears when the investigation into the Barksdale organization begins following its money. Lester Freeman understands that arrests on street corners will only reach replaceable workers, so the detail starts examining property records, campaign contributions, and political connections. The money leads away from the towers and into respectable Baltimore. It reaches businesses, developers, and politicians, including Clay Davis. Once the investigation moves in that direction, the police leadership becomes uncomfortable. Following Avon Barksdale is acceptable. Following money that may connect Avon to powerful people creates a different kind of case. Clay benefits from that difference before he even becomes a major character. His position gives him protection that a street dealer could never expect. Police commanders understand that investigating a state senator could create trouble for the department, so the money trail becomes politically dangerous. That protection does not require Clay to make an obvious threat. His office carries the threat for him. Everyone involved knows that a senator can reach commissioners, mayors, prosecutors, donors, and people who decide police budgets. Asking too many questions about his finances can damage a career long before it produces a conviction. Avon protects himself through fear. Clay protects himself through connections. This becomes important because Clay is willing to accept money from the same criminal world that the police are being paid to investigate. When Mayor Royce confronts him about accepting questionable contributions, Clay does not offer a complicated denial. He says he will take anyone's money if they are giving it away. The statement describes his entire approach to politics. Clay does not want responsibility for knowing where the money came from. He only wants the benefit of receiving it. If the source later becomes embarrassing, he can claim that political fundraising requires accepting contributions from thousands of people, and that nobody has time to investigate every donor. That argument contains enough truth to remain useful. Political campaigns do receive money from many sources. Candidates depend on fundraisers and intermediaries. Clay uses the normal confusion of campaign finance as cover for behavior that is clearly deliberate. He knows criminals need political access. He knows developers need permits and public money. He knows politicians need campaign contributions and voter support. Clay places himself between all of them and charges whatever he believes each person will pay. Stringer Bell becomes his most obvious victim. By season 3, Stringer is trying to move Barksdale money into legitimate property development. He attends business classes, studies economic ideas, buys real estate, and begins dealing with political figures. He believes the skills that helped him manage a drug organization will also allow him to succeed in legitimate business. Stringer understands money and organization. He does not understand how Baltimore's political class extracts money from someone who wants access. Clay recognizes that immediately. Stringer needs building permits, public funding, political support, and introductions to people inside the development system. Clay presents himself as the person who can remove those obstacles. Every delay creates another payment. Every official who supposedly needs to be persuaded becomes another reason for Stringer to provide money. Stringer eventually gives Clay around $250,000. Some progress occurs, which keeps the arrangement believable, but nothing close to what Stringer thinks he purchased. When he finally explains the situation to Maurice Levy, Levy tells him he has been rain-made. The idea is simple. Someone claims they can make it rain. If rain eventually arrives, they take credit. If it stays dry, they explain that more money is required. The customer can never prove what would have happened without them. Clay sells political influence in the same way. If Stringer's permits are approved, Clay can claim his contacts made it happen. If they are delayed, Clay can say another person needs to be paid. Stringer cannot inspect the process because he has no experience inside it. He is handing over cash and trusting Clay to describe where it goes. Clay does not even need to provide a complete service. He only needs to produce enough movement to keep Stringer believing that the next payment will finish the job. This is one of the few times Stringer looks completely inexperienced. On the street, he understands when someone is avoiding payment or trying to take territory. Inside city development, the language changes and he loses that instinct. Bribes become consulting. Theft becomes access. Delays become part of the process. Clay takes money from one of Baltimore's most dangerous criminals and leaves Stringer with no practical way to recover it. Stringer's first response is to have Clay killed. Avon rejects the idea because murdering a state senator would bring a level of attention their organization could not survive. Clay's public position protects him from the same criminal who was willing to murder people over much smaller amounts. That is a remarkable achievement. Clay steals from a drug lord and leaves the drug lord trapped by respect for the political system. Avon calls Stringer's political dealings an away game because Avon understands that they have entered a world whose rules they do not know. Stringer believes legitimate business will move him above the street. Clay shows him that corruption already exists there in a more protected form. On the street, Stringer would recognize a robbery. In Clay's office, he receives meetings, explanations, and promises until the money is gone. Clay's ability to exploit Stringer tells us more than the amount stolen. Stringer is intelligent, suspicious, and accustomed to dealing with criminals. Clay defeats him because he understands the value of appearing legitimate. A suit, an office, and a political title allow him to make demands that would look absurd coming from someone on a corner. Maurice Levy knows Clay's reputation and finds the entire situation almost amusing. Levy understands that Clay regularly takes money without producing the influence he promises. That knowledge also shows how accepted Clay's behavior has become among Baltimore's professional criminals. Clay is not hiding from people who understand the system. He is a known risk. People continue dealing with him because access to government remains valuable, and Clay has spent years convincing everyone that he can provide it. That places him in a different category from a politician who accepts one bribe. Clay's corruption is his business model. His elected position gives him access to public decisions. His relationships with poor constituents give him votes and a convincing public identity. His connections to developers and business owners create money. Criminal organizations provide contributions they cannot complain about losing. Each group supplies something the others need. Clay remains in the middle, speaking the language required for whichever group is standing in front of him. With Stringer, he speaks about permits and government grants. With politicians, he speaks about fundraising and delivering votes. With voters, he speaks about loyalty to neglected neighborhoods. When investigators arrive, he speaks about public service and racial injustice. Clay's greatest skill is making all of those versions sound believable. The investigation into his finances eventually produces a serious case. Lester follows deposits, withdrawals, contributions, and other transactions connected to Clay's political operation. The evidence suggests that money intended for political or community purposes regularly ends up under Clay's personal control. His driver and associate, Day, handles parts of that movement. Checks are cashed, money passes through accounts, and Clay's public explanation does not match the financial records. Prosecutors believe they finally have enough evidence to show that he has been using political funds as personal money. Clay's response reveals why he is so difficult to convict. He does not try to prove that every transaction was properly recorded. He changes what the trial is about. On the witness stand, Clay presents himself as a politician who helps poor constituents when the official system fails them. Someone needs money for an electricity bill, funeral, rent payment, or emergency. Clay claims he gives it to them. He describes people arriving at his office with immediate problems and explains that he cannot ask them to wait for a government program or complete several weeks of paperwork. Suddenly, the missing money becomes evidence of generosity. The accounting problems remain, but Clay gives the jury a reason to see them differently. Prosecutor Rupert Bond presents numbers. Clay presents people from the same communities represented in the jury box. Bond says funds were misused. Clay says those funds went back onto Baltimore streets through direct help that was never properly documented. His defense works because it is probably mixed with some truth. Clay may genuinely give money to constituents. Doing so helps maintain his political support and strengthens his reputation as someone who solves problems personally. A small amount of real assistance can provide cover for a much larger amount of theft. That arrangement is more effective than simply keeping everything. People can remember Clay helping with a bill or funeral. Those stories become community evidence supporting him when prosecutors ask where the rest of the money went. Clay has turned constituent service into both political advertising and legal protection. He also understands the racial and political position of the prosecution. Bond is a black prosecutor with ambitions of becoming mayor. Clay portrays the case as an ambitious official attacking an established black leader who has spent years helping neglected communities. Bond expects a corruption trial to improve his reputation. Clay uses that ambition against him. If Bond wants publicity, Clay will make sure the public sees a different story. The jury acquits Clay, leaving Bond and Rhonda Perlman watching him celebrate outside the courthouse. The evidence has not disappeared. Clay has simply given the jury a version of the case that feels more familiar and convincing than the prosecution's records. This acquittal is one of the clearest examples of power in The Wire because Clay does not escape through physical force or a hidden threat. He persuades ordinary people to protect him. He takes the public image built through years of political work and uses it to neutralize evidence of corruption. The courtroom victory also shows that Clay understands Baltimore better than the people prosecuting him. Bond believes the case is about whether money was used legally. Clay knows the jury will also consider who was using it, who supposedly received it, and why the government suddenly cares. He understands that many residents have watched official systems ignore their problems. A politician handing out cash may feel more useful than a prosecutor arriving years later with bank statements. Clay uses the city's real failures as his defense against stealing from it. That places him near the center of The Wire's larger argument about institutions. Baltimore's public systems frequently fail the people they were created to serve. Clay does not repair that failure. He makes himself valuable inside it. If city agencies responded quickly to poor residents, Clay's envelopes and personal favors would matter less. If development moved transparently, Stringer would not need someone promising secret access. If campaign finance were easier to trace, Clay could not accept every contribution and deny knowledge of its source. Clay needs dysfunction because dysfunction creates customers. He can help someone with an electricity bill and ask for loyalty later. He can promise a developer access to public money. He can tell a criminal that permits require additional payments. Every inefficient part of government creates another place where Clay can insert himself. The result is corruption that feeds on the city's inability to function properly. Clay benefits when official routes are slow, confusing, or inaccessible because he can sell a faster route through himself. That makes him more dangerous than his humorous presentation suggests. His famous extended pronunciation of shit can make him feel like comic relief, especially when he is cornered. The humor hides how quickly he is calculating the room. Clay is rarely surprised for long. Bad news reaches him, he gives his famous reaction, and shortly afterward he is working out who can be blamed, pressured, persuaded, or sold. Even his legal danger becomes another transaction. After the state trial, Lester still has evidence connected to potential mortgage fraud. This evidence could support a federal case, which would be more dangerous than the charges Clay has already defeated. The federal authorities are reluctant to proceed after the acquittal has turned Clay into a public symbol, but Clay does not know how weak Lester's position is. Lester approaches him and makes the threat appear real. Clay begins giving him information about Baltimore's political and legal corruption. He identifies backroom arrangements and eventually provides information that helps expose Maurice Levy's access to sealed grand jury documents. Clay protects himself by selling another corrupt person. There is no loyalty conflict because Clay has never treated the people around him as partners in a shared cause. They are contacts whose value lasts until trading them becomes more useful. That response is completely consistent with how he treated Stringer. Clay accepted Stringer's money because it was available. Once investigators threatened him, information became the new currency. He paid with whatever belonged to someone else. The fact that Lester is bluffing makes Clay's cooperation even more revealing. Clay knows he has committed enough crimes that a believable federal threat requires no detailed explanation. He does not respond with genuine confusion. He begins negotiating. His instinct is accurate because corruption has taught him that every dangerous situation probably has a price. This is where Maurice Levy becomes the strongest rival for the title of most crooked character. Levy uses the legal system to protect drug organizations responsible for murder. He teaches criminals how to hide money, questions witnesses aggressively, benefits from information leaked out of the courthouse, and searches for procedural mistakes that can destroy legitimate prosecutions. He also understands enough about Baltimore's corruption to avoid becoming an easy victim of it. He knows Clay's reputation and immediately recognizes what happened to Stringer. Levy's behavior may create more direct harm because his work helps violent organizations continue operating. Murderers return to the street, witnesses are exposed, and investigations collapse. He is protected by legal respectability in much the same way Clay is protected by political respectability. The difference is the office each man claims to serve. Levy is a private defense attorney. His professional role is to represent his clients, although bribing officials and purchasing secret court information obviously goes beyond legal defense. He is corrupt, but the people paying him understand that he works for their interests. Clay is an elected public official. His authority is supposed to belong to the people of Maryland. He uses that authority to extract money from anyone seeking access, including the same communities he invokes whenever he needs votes or protection. Levy sells legal expertise to criminals. Clay sells pieces of government. Clay also has a wider range of victims. He takes money from drug dealers, developers, donors, and political funds. He can exploit a powerful person like Stringer while also using poor constituents as the public explanation for missing money. Very few characters can move between those worlds as comfortably as he does. The street organizations remain mostly confined to the drug trade. Avon and Marlowe control territory through violence, but they cannot enter every political room safely. Clay can accept money connected to those organizations, attend official events, speak for the community, and leave with his public position intact. Calling him more crooked than Marlowe does not mean he is more evil. Marlowe orders people murdered because they insult him. Chris and Snoop fill vacant houses with bodies. Avon approves killings to protect the Barksdale organization. Clay's crimes do not create the same immediate level of physical suffering. Crook describes something more specific than cruelty. Marlowe openly operates as a criminal. He does not ask Baltimore to believe he serves the public. Clay's power depends on holding public office while privately selling its benefits. His corruption damages the boundary that is supposed to separate criminal money from government authority. That damage reaches beyond the amount Clay personally steals. Once criminals believe political outcomes can be purchased, public decisions become another part of their business. Once developers believe payments matter more than rules, legitimate competition becomes pointless. Once residents believe every politician is stealing anyway, proving one case becomes harder because corruption feels normal. Clay survives inside that cynicism. He can argue that campaign money always comes from questionable sources, political favors are part of the job, and cash handed to constituents is simply how Baltimore works. Each statement contains enough reality to make the corruption look ordinary. The police department has its own dishonest figures. Burrell protects his position, suppresses investigations when they become politically inconvenient, and gives mayors the crime numbers they want. Rawls manipulates statistics and prioritizes appearances over useful police work. McNulty eventually creates a fictional serial killer to redirect resources. Their actions cause serious damage, but their motives remain connected to particular pressures or objectives. Burrell wants to survive as commissioner. Rawls wants controllable numbers. McNulty wants resources for a real investigation and convinces himself the lie is justified by the arrests it might produce. Clay's corruption is less complicated. He wants money, influence, and survival, and he will use almost any political explanation that protects them. He does not need to believe he is helping Baltimore. He only needs Baltimore to believe it. Scott Templeton also lies for personal advancement. He creates sources and invents details because dramatic stories improve his career. His corruption spreads through the newspaper because editors want awards badly enough to ignore warning signs. Templeton's reach is narrower. He deceives one institution and benefits from its ambition. Clay moves through politics, law enforcement, development, campaign finance, criminal money, and community relationships. He has more people to manipulate and a much better understanding of what each one wants. The system also repeatedly helps Clay without requiring him to control everything personally. Burrell understands the political risk of investigating him. Royce knows Clay is useful for fundraising and votes. Garcetti's administration has to consider the political consequences of a federal case. Bond chooses a public state prosecution partly because a victory could support his own ambitions. When that decision fails, Clay emerges stronger. Everyone approaches him with a separate interest. Clay survives by making those interests compete. The police want permission to investigate. Prosecutors want a conviction. Political leaders want to avoid damaging their party. Bond wants the case attached to his name. Federal officials consider how the prosecution will appear after Clay's acquittal. Those conflicts create openings, and Clay needs only one of them to remain free. His greatest protection is that nobody around him is acting entirely for the public either. Their corruption may be smaller or more respectable, but Clay understands it. He knows which prosecutor wants publicity, which mayor needs campaign money, which developer needs approval, and which criminal wants to appear legitimate. He can negotiate with all of them because he recognizes the private desire beneath the official language. That is why he looks so comfortable throughout the series. Clay lives in a city where almost every institution rewards people for protecting themselves. He has simply removed the embarrassment other characters occasionally feel about it. Stringer wants to become a businessman. Garcetti wants to become governor. Bond wants to become mayor. Templeton wants recognition. Burrell wants to remain commissioner. Clay does not need to create their ambition. He waits for it to bring them to him. Once they arrive, he charges admission. My judgment is that Clay Davis is the most crooked character in The Wire, even though he is far from its most violent or destructive person. Maurice Levy comes closest because he corrupts the justice system while protecting major criminal organizations. Burrell and Rawls damage policing through political obedience. Templeton corrupts journalism for personal advancement. The drug organizations corrupt neighborhoods through money and violence. Clay crosses more boundaries than any of them. He takes criminal money while serving in public office. He sells political access without guaranteeing results. He uses genuine poverty as cover for personal theft. He turns his prosecution into a civil rights performance, wins over the jury, and walks out of court stronger than he entered. When another investigation threatens him, he trades information about fellow crooks and survives again. Every part of Baltimore becomes useful to him. Crime provides money, politics provides protection, poverty provides a public image, the courts provide a stage, other people's corruption provides something to trade when he is cornered. The clearest proof comes from his dealings with Stringer. Stringer has spent years stealing from Baltimore through drugs, violence, and property schemes. Clay takes $250,000 from him, gives him almost nothing, and remains protected because Stringer cannot respond without destroying himself. For once, the drug lord is the inexperienced customer. Clay Davis succeeds because he understands that the safest way to steal in Baltimore is to stand close enough to government that the theft starts looking like politics. By the end of the show, he has been investigated, publicly exposed, prosecuted, and acquitted. He is still talking, still trading information, and still capable of returning to the same system that produced him. Most crooked characters eventually lose because they break the rules carelessly. Clay survives because he understands that the rules themselves can be